Klein and then Rue, the fork of of Klein that moves a little bit faster. And there's a lot of folks that still use that at Amazon. It is a full-blown coding agent. It's not bad. It really isn't. It is experience baked into the IDE. But honestly, once you get your feet wet with Klein, you're left wanting a little bit more. And so enter tools like Kiro IDE and Kiro CLI. Both of these tools let you run concurrent agentic sessions. And that's really big in my space, right? Like when you're a full-time software engineer and you've got tasks to complete and you're doing everything from researching a topic because you have an idea, working on a spec because you need to complete a task, investigating an issue in a sandbox environment because there's a problem. You can do all these things at the same time. Like this isn't a game of let me type a prompt and watch, the text go by like Matrix, and then just wait until it completes, because it could be 20 minutes, right? Like you give it a very elaborate prompt with a lot of steps to do. The agent's really good at doing them using its internal to-do tool with the coding assistant or the coding agent, in this case, like Kiro, provides the to-do tool and then goes to town on the task you gave it. If you give it a long task, it could be 20 minutes, it could be 30 minutes. It's very common for my engineering team to be giving Kiro a task that takes 30 minutes to complete. So what do you do during those 30 minutes, right? You certainly don't sit on your hands. As an engineer, you find ways to move forward, right? Like we've made coding undifferentiated. Now we move up the ladder, we move up the stack, and we focus a little bit more on system design, on software architecture. And now we're working on multiple things at the same time. And it's like we have a team of engineers all of a sudden. It's like we've made ourselves like a software team manager. And now we have like a team of agents that we give tasks to complete.
That's right. And I so much of what you said had so many thoughts in my mind. I kind of want to get into all of it. And this is certainly right up my alley. I'm, as a builder, as a former software developer, right long before I came to AWS, I was a developer, and then grew chops. And it's always about building chops. And I've released software in so many different languages and frameworks, all the way in multiple cloud providers. Obviously had an affinity towards Amazon. Actually, Lambda is what changed my life as a developer way back when. And so my inclination is to build still now, but then I came to AWS as an SA, and the role kind of forced me into a different skill set, of some of which I had, some of which I'm still developing, but still just want to build stuff. And I always tell folks like that feeling that I had early in my career as a developer, where I would stay up all night to try to figure out how to get this thing. Like I just need it to compile, or I just need it to run. It's not quite end to end. It's not working right, but I'm going to stay up all night until it does. I haven't had that feeling until Klein, right? Until I installed Klein, and I was like, oh, okay, let's see what this thing can do. And then I just started prompting it. But hey, Juan, maybe I think this is all, let's go into that. I want to kind of start maybe, this is AWS Specialist Tech Bites. I like to ask the first question is, I'm talking to specialists across the AWS. And so what would you say that you specialize in at AWS? What's your specialty?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a principal engineer in the specialist tech team. So we are the engineering arm of the specialist organization. Our focus is on building the tooling that enables our specialist community to do their jobs more effectively, right? Spend more time with customers, deliver higher quality content to customers, deliver a better experience that delights customers, right? Everything from how we build, write, and deliver workshops to how we scan our content to make sure that it meets the Amazon bar. And now the project that I'm working on, which is codenamed Demerzel, is now a project that we're using in order to equip our specialist organization to not really consolidate knowledge, but to weaponize the knowledge that we have in order to more effectively and more completely answer questions for customers, to perform a lot of the research that used to take a lot of time, do that in a more automated agentic fashion, and to just get customers answers quickly, right? And then over time, just scale that out further so that customers could eventually self-service that as well.
Yeah, you can imagine working at a place like AWS, like just a massive company full of builders. Whenever we need something done, we go build the thing that we need to help us do our jobs. And so like I noticed at first when I came here, it was like there's all these different tools, and it was like, how do I navigate all of these different tools? And certainly now with the advent of agentic software development, creating agents, doing all this stuff, that is taking a sort of a turn towards those types of tooling. And so you're saying you're working on one of those kind of agentic tools to help developers and specialists across the company. I am one of those. I'm actually beta testing the tool that you're talking about. I'm part of the evaluations team, relatively new to that team. So I'm still maybe not as value add, but figuring out how to make those prompts a little bit better through a continuous evaluation loop, which I'm really into right now. Like evaluations is really a space that I'm like, okay, I could see myself living in this space a little while. It's big enough. It goes into different areas and it can go deep. So it's got the breadth and depth that I like when I'm looking to like bite something off. So you're working on these tools, and how is that sort of like? I mean, Demerzel is agentic. You're using agents to build agents. What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. We're using agents to build agents. We're using agents for the entire software development lifecycle and operations as well, right? So we use agents from the very early days of ideation, dumping stream of consciousness into proposals, summarizing meeting notes, gathering feedback from stakeholders, and then eventually deciding on what it is that we were going to build and how we were going to build it, right? So we were using agents as early as basically like the beginning of the project. And then today we use it in the full software development lifecycle, all the way starting with the task and the spec, all the way through what I like to do with specs, which is experimentation. And then from that to validation, deployment in sandbox environments, evaluations in sandbox environments, then operations, and then iterations, right? So it's the entire life cycle beginning to end. And we do it with as few human interventions as possible, right? So we're trying to leverage the ability of an agent to really operate by itself, to work by itself, and to work with others by delegating to other agents in order to essentially close the loop on the agentic coding workflow. So it's not a short loop working on just one task, but the big loop working on the individual tasks all the way through implementation, deployment, testing, all the validations, and then iterations, updating integration tests, rerunning integration tests, following our process all the way through cutting the code review, right? So like we've automated that process. We use it pretty much every day as part of what we do, all the way through to deployment to production, right? Or deployment to our pipeline, which deploys to production. And then we also use it on the operations side, right? So anytime that we need to investigate an issue, we've got an alarm in one of our environments. We've got a report from a customer that ABC happened, right? Agents are phenomenal at investigations, right? Give them the right tools and the right prompting and the right context, and they can explore 3, 4 theories, right? Us as experienced engineers, so like some of us used to be solutions architects as well. When we see these problems, like we immediately have ideas. We have 3, 4, 5 ideas of what it could be, right? In a world without agents, we're out there kind of testing our ideas one at a time, figuring out what it could be. In a world of agents, right? Like we can dump ideas onto an agent. Agent has its own ideas, and then they can parallelize the approach. We 4, 5, 6 agents all concurrently exploring all the things it could be, running CloudWatch logs, insights, queries, looking at metrics, alarms, like reading a couple things in Dynamo. And then if you prompt it right and you ask it for evidence, ask it to double check its work, you'll come back with a very good theory of what the issue potentially is. And
Yeah,
you can conclude an investigation in like 3 minutes.
yeah. I think there's no coincidence that some of the earliest integrated or embedded agentic capabilities within AWS, particularly within the AWS services that you're familiar with, were investigative in nature, right? Like if you think secure, I just remember launching stuff at reInvent, and it was all, like I just kept being investigative agent now in Security Hub, or now this investigation agent now in this other service. And it makes sense, right? Like it kind of automates this like arduous manual sifting of vast amounts of data and then synthesizing that into something meaningful. Makes sense as like a kind of a step one. But you said that multiple people on your development team. How many human developers are we talking about in a team?
It's 6 total, counting myself.
Okay, so I've always been a fan of like relatively small software. I've always felt like smaller agile software teams I can do more faster. I firmly believe in that. The moth, what is it? The Mothman or Moth Myth. I don't know, some paper that was written in the 70s that I can't remember anymore.
Yeah.
Adding more developers doesn't mean more, faster or faster results. So you have 6 people. I kind of want to talk a little bit about like spec-driven development, because spec-driven development seems to me like one of those things that made a lot of sense as a collaboration tool, not just a collaboration with you and the agent, but a collaboration with you and your team. It kind of orients everybody around the same thing. And it kind of maybe felt like one of those things where like I didn't want to over engineer. I was like, whenever I was like a 1-man team or a 2-man team, I didn't want to over engineer process, like having this really rigid agile process that we were conforming to, because it's like it's just 2 of us, and that's just gonna be process for process sake. Specs kind of feel like that to me, because like I can keep the spec in my head, but there seems to be a lot of value in the collaborative aspect of it. Maybe correct me if I'm thinking about it wrong.
No, no, I think you're spot on. And we have like I have a slightly different name for it, right? Because I feel like the term process, as you said, right, can be seen as something that's like heavy and bureaucratic, and you really don't want that in the way of progress, right? But the reality is that spec-driven development is part of what I call the knowledge architecture, which is essentially that effort that you put up front and then continue to invest in for the remainder of the life of the product, to establish what used to be things that were siloed in people's minds, was tribal knowledge. You're going to document that, right, into a series of documents, workflows, custom agents, that collectively form the foundation that becomes the context of how you use your agents. And one of those things is specs, right? So like if I break down this knowledge architecture that we're now using across many of our teams, um, what we do is we start with what's called a high level like vision document for the product. This is the anchor of the product. That's like layer one. This is the thing that describes what it is, what it's supposed to do, what are all the high level components of this thing. And then sometimes we
Is
get
this
into
where
like,
you're getting executive buy-in too, like the vision from your leaders to say, "Yep, this is the thing that we."
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So at Amazon, we generally start with like that PRFAQ process, right? So you write the press release, you write the FAQ, and then we have multiple doc reads. We get a lot of feedback usually this way. It's a very formal Amazon document. I take that and some input from engineers, right? And then we build what's called the product vision document, which is a little bit more technical in nature. So we do dive a little bit more into like the stack and all the components that will make up the product, things that we don't generally go into such detail in the PRFAQ. But this forms like layer one. This is like the anchor of all documents and everything that we do from that point forward. Like underneath that, or layer two, is what we call the high level design documents, the HLDs. These are essentially the descriptions of every component of our system, and we don't usually write them all at once. We write the ones that we need to form the anchors, to have the engineers. So I mentioned 6 different people in the team, so that they can all work autonomously, independently, right? But do it in a way that is in lockstep with what we've already agreed upon, right? Like we're not just vibe coding in the full sense of the term vibe. Like we're not coding how we feel. We're very much doing it based on a pre-agreed design and pattern that comes from the anchors, right? So once we have those high level design documents in place, those are usually worked on by senior engineers or principal engineers. Then we have the specifications or the specs, right? And so now we get into spec driven development. And so that's where we spend most of our time now. Is we have a series of tasks in our board to complete. Those are all grounded in some high level design document. And then the engineer that's assigned the task will start by writing the specification for the task. And this is where they use their skill set as a software engineer to come to the table with that software architecture and the system design of how they think this will be put together, right? So they're dumping a stream of consciousness onto our agent, along with the high level design document, which is already in context, whether they specify it or not, right? This is how we've built our knowledge architecture. It's there. And so then they build that specification. The specification covers 2 things. One, it replaces what we used to call the low-level design document. The specification does very much describe in detail what is being built and how it's going to be built. And the agent needs that, right? So like that's one of the things that it actually specifies. And the second is very much a broken down, like taskified. These are the things that we got to do in the places that we got to do them in. And sometimes in those specs, we also include the results of experimentation, right? And I'll get into that later, but there's a whole aspect of experimentation that I'm very passionate about, and I feel very
That's the fun
strongly
stuff.
is a best practice that not enough people really practice, and they should, because the results are fantastic. But our engineers work on those specs, right? And then once they've built the specs, then we do a lot of iterative um, like verification with agents. So agents work really well when you ask them to do things like, hey, can you review this like 3, 4, 5 times in a row? And so we have spec review custom agent prompts that we use with Kiro in order to uh, basically iteratively review the specs. And then we do it in a way where the spec review agents run as delegated agents that have their own context, so they don't poison themselves with the findings of other agents. Otherwise, they tend to confuse themselves and think, wait, I've already done this before. I found 3 issues and fixed it. Like, I can't find more issues. There were 3. It's like, no, there's definitely more. You need to like clear your context, check again. And so we use sub-agent delegation to address that. And yeah, we go from that to spec to implementation. And so that's layer 4, the code, right? So like I mentioned product vision 1, we have the HLDs as 2, specs is 3, and then finally the code is your 4th.
Yeah, what you're describing makes a lot of sense. And the way that I'm thinking about it is, I heard somebody recently say, like, as technical skills sort of become less the delineate, the differentiating factor in software development, because like you always used to hear the senior developer, the 10x developer, the rockstar developer, and because they could program and they were this. So it's not so much like your technical skills, but it's going to become more how well you can articulate a vision, how well you can articulate what it is you're trying to build. What you just described to me just seems like a very systematic, well laid out way of describing a vision so that it is compatible with agentic developer, the agent to develop. So you still have to do that, though. You still have to describe what you want in a very well thought out way. And then we get to the coding part, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I want to be very clear here, right? Like the process that we're practicing today in this team that I'm working with primarily now is not a process that just was born out of thin air. This is a process that we've been refining for quite some time and is built on experiences developed in the Event Outfitters organization. Um, uh, and it basically is the conglomeration of experimentation across multiple engineering teams working on production services that power the experience for hundreds of thousands of users. We have products that have public facing like interfaces and functionality that like actual AWS customers interact with every day. And then we have a lot of tools that are all internal and a lot of engineers that made that happen over a very long time, right? So we leaned in on those teams and that experience and we experimented. What works, what doesn't work. We read some papers, we tried some new things, and we have a culture of collaboration, and then we kind of have collected our thoughts, and whatever works, we just put into practice. And so this new team I'm working with, Demerzel, is now leaning in on the very best and the very latest of all that experience that we developed across all the other teams. So everything that I'm describing here is very much a conglomeration of that, right? It's all that experience distilled into like one team that's now benefiting from that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think like being humble in that regard, I hear a lot of people starting to be a little bit more humble, because as developers, we're used to being the people with the answers. Oh, here's how you build that. And then but we're also kind of learning in this world. And I'm trying to be humble in that there's new techniques, I'm learning stuff from you, even in this conversation, that I can apply. But it's also, some of what you're saying is reaffirming just sort of intuition that I have. But you mentioned something that like is interesting to me. You said what doesn't work, or where has it gone wrong? Like, where are been the sticking points or things like that? Maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. Do you have any kind of anecdotes or experiences there?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I think one of the very early things that we did wrong when it came to like the adoption of AI was being a little bit too over enthusiastic about it. Like I myself am very guilty of this. I was so excited about this and I was really making it work for me. But, I was also giving the impression to others that if it worked for me, it'll work for you. Like you just need to try it and you're doing it wrong if it doesn't work for you. And the reality is that there is a difference between greenfield projects, brownfield projects. There is a difference between like an engineer that's been doing this for 20 years and one that's been doing it for 5. And as we went through that transitionary process, the reality is like there was no universal answer to this. Like AI was at the beginning very helpful for some, but not for everyone. And so unfortunately, in the, intention of like, or with the intention and the good intention of helping others like accelerate their work and, you know, be able to do more with the resources they have, we eroded some trust because some engineers went and used these tools and discovered, wait, this doesn't work. Now I'm down 2 days of fighting this thing, producing absolute garbage. I don't know what I'm doing wrong with this thing. It's just not working. And I still got to finish the thing that I said I was going to finish by the end of the sprint. Right. So, like, there's unfortunately quite a few folks that along this journey got a little burned by the tool not working and the process not working. Like, they were told it might and it could and it would. And so there was a lot of sort of like having to relearn or re-earn that trust from the team, right? So I worked pretty hard on this with a lot of other folks who were very much into it and steeped in using AI every day, using these agentic coding tools and building these processes that we felt a lot stronger about it being effective and being compatible with many different kinds of projects, not just greenfield ones, but also, existing complex architectures. And so we slowly earned that trust back from engineers, right? But it took time, right? Like there were definitely some wounds to heal there, to realize that no, AI really is very helpful and you should be embracing it. And then folks little by little started seeing sort of like the light and understanding their role in all of it, right? Because there's also a little bit of an element of fear here, right? Of like, AI is here to replace us as engineers. Like, why would I enable this thing that will come after my job? If I don't adopt it, then that means I can stay around for a little bit longer. And so it's a little bit of a re-education there as well of like, that's not at all what this means, right? Like these tools
Right.
are here to, help us do what we're doing better. It's an amplification tool. And it's also a way to, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, right? It's like we make coding like the tool will make coding undifferentiated, but the reason we hire these engineers, the reason they work in our team is not because they know how to write code, right? Like there's a lot more to being a software engineer at Amazon and in most other places than just writing code, right? Like there's a lot of system design, software architecture that makes a software engineer effective at writing code. It's not about the syntax, right? It's not about whether you can read some API spec and read the description of how to use a library. Agents have undifferentiated that, right? Like AI has made that undifferentiated. So we embrace that and we move up the stack, right? So now my engineers moved up the stack and now they work across multiple things at the same time and they work on the architecture piece, on the system design piece. It's a little bit more challenging in a way, but honestly, I think it's more rewarding. And so now you take that combined with the agentic coding tools and you're delivering twice as much with the same number of resources that you had previously.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's so many things when you start to talk. I just have so many different like you're talking. I always have thought through the abstraction of software development from the early days. We've come a long way from punching ones and zeros on a card and getting a computer to understand that. And then each subsequent iteration was this abstraction towards closer to like natural language. But then all of a sudden you have generative AI, and it's this massive leap towards huge leap in abstraction, right, of how we write software. But underlying all of that, you still have to have solid logical thinking and problem solving skills. It reminds me of like the first job that I got where they were like, gave you impossible questions to answer just to see how you process the question. That's how they were determining whether or not you were engineer capability. Everything else you could learn, right? Like you can learn syntax, but how you break down a problem and think through it is still something that you have to develop. That's still going to be true in the agentic world.
Yeah, very
And
true.
the eroding the trust, I think there's a lot of things that happen all at once. From my perspective, is like there was a maturing of our thinking about these tools. There's a maturing of the tool set themselves. Like we take for granted now we have, and I think this is going to be even true, although I think it's going to slow down a little bit. But like last year, we were launching tool after tool after tool, Curo CLI, with all these different capabilities continuously being launched. So it seems to me like there's a slowdown of the tools, although those still matter. But our understanding and alignment with the development of the tools, and then some of the patterns and frameworks like spec-driven development that you're talking about, all those things sort of converging to now there's a consistent, rational, sensical life cycle that we can start to attach to write better code or build better systems. And so I think it kind of sounds like you and the team have have figured some of that out, kind of have the battle scars and have come out the other side and are doing something productive with it. And I think there's a lot of people that could benefit from your wisdom. So we've got, now that we're at the code, like what take us from there, man? What like we developed some code, the agent did it all, took our spec, translated it in some code, but we're not done. There's still a lot more that needs to happen before
Yeah.
it's in the hands or into production.
Yeah, there's a lot more, and there's also some in between steps that are sometimes optional but strongly encouraged, right? So I mentioned
Yeah.
experimentation, right? So like
Yeah, I love
combining
this.
on what we were just talking about, which is writing code has been made undifferentiated by agents. Then how do you harness that, right? So, in the past, if you needed to, test whether to do things like, or to do something, with method A, B, or C, a lot of times you just had to work in the most efficient space possible, which many times was in the design space, in the space of theory, right? Like you were researching the capabilities of things, looking at like some benchmark numbers that came out of some paper over here, and then piece all that together to then make a hypothesis, an educated one, but still, you're kind of guessing and putting things together. Like, oh, I think option B is the best way to do this. And so then you spend all your time designing and building option B into your product. But what if it was option A? Right. And so, like, today, you don't really have to make such concessions. Like, you can absolutely try all three options, like, at the same time. Like, writing code is undifferentiated. Like, you can set up the problem, define the constraints, and you can kick off, a session with Kiro to go explore the space with three different agents, all working on an experiment, all working on a common research document, documenting the findings like a research journal. And you could be having lunch with your coworkers while that's happening. And then you come back to a well thought out analysis. All the code that was written to validate it could be 10,000 lines of code. Are you going to go through all of it? Probably not all of it. But, as a good engineer, you spot check some of it. You spot check some of the assumptions. There's a certain element of like code smell and like, number smell that, as an engineer with experience, you can sort of spot where like, yeah, that's definitely not right. Right. And then, or you could read it and go like, this kind of makes sense and lines up with what, we were researching, but now we can put numbers next to it. Right. So experimentation is really big, not just to make decisions, but to also validate ideas. Right. Like, one of the big things that we worked on for Demerzel was the search pipeline for Demerzel. And the search pipeline involves things like decomposing queries, um, taking those queries and concurrently scanning or concurrently like retrieving from a knowledge base, and then re-ranking results, deduplicating, boosting, penalizing results. Like there's a lot of steps in the pipeline for how we do this and a lot of things that we touch in order to do it. So a lot of products from Bedrock, for example, and then models like Cohere Re-Ranker, Nova 2 Lite that we're using along the way. And, it like on paper and according to the docs, you have a pretty good idea of how to do it. And the agent does a great job at like processing all that data, building the spec, and it looks like it's ready to go. But if you ask the agent, hey, before we implement, before we go do this and deploy to the sandbox environment, let's write a couple of experiments. Like, let's take this pipeline and let's just define it as one big JavaScript file or one big Python file, right? Let's execute this thing against our sandbox environment, right? But make API calls directly to the sandbox environment. And we can validate in a much tighter loop, which means it's faster, whether this is going to work or not. Better yet, if you let the agent just do all of it, it'll write it, it'll execute it, it'll find the problems with it, it'll go update the code, it'll go execute it again until the whole thing is working. And then whatever it learned from that, it goes back to the spec and it updates and says, ooh, this assumption was wrong. That assumption was wrong. Hey, the docs are wrong about this. So we actually did stumble on one where the docs were just wrong. And so we cut the team a ticket about that, but we also corrected it in our spec. And now we have numbers to go with it as well. So now the spec has the experimentation, outcomes in it. And now we have a lot more confidence that this thing is ready to go. If I execute it, it will probably work on the first shot. And there's no rewards for things working in the first shot. It's not like you go around bragging to your coworkers that you got it to work in the first shot. But it makes me excited because that dev cycle to the sandbox of deployment and testing and cycling back is a larger feedback loop. And so that one can take 20 minutes in order to, go cycle through another idea and then another idea. It's 20 minutes every time, right? When you do it locally with experimentation, the feedback cycle is 2 minutes. Right. And to agents, wall clock time does not matter. They can work all day happy. It does to me. Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like to work only 9 to 5. I like to be home on time for dinner. So like, we
Sometimes
prioritize
we have a day
experimentation and
off.
move step. Yeah.
Yeah, prior I love this part of experimentation. It's so true. I feel this intuitively, and you're putting language to experience that I'm having. So powerful to be able to. We used to call them like we still would have some experimentation in historical software development, like how we used to write software. I'm gonna like sound like the old guy in the room, like uh, we would say, let's tech spike that, right? We don't know. We're doing our poker planning. We don't know how to maybe solve this problem. We're going to tech spike that, run some experimentation, see if it works. But that is like what you're talking about is that on steroids. Like I'll give you another simple example just to kind of connect this. We had a thought, is it better to run our LLM as a judge evaluation as a one agent with a big, massive, like deep prompt and having, turning the slider on the agent. Let's throw the biggest model we can at it with a massive prompt. Is that better, or is it multi-agent, right? Let's take, if we're going to evaluate this response and we're going to do it based on these dimensions, what if we split those dimensions into multiple agents? And then even within the multi-agent, there's a pattern. There's a debating pattern. What if they debate their results first before, or they can parallelize their results and then synthesize it once they're done? Which one of these things is going to produce a better? And we use some metrics, but we were able to experiment to figure out what is going to be the best result. Now we have to define best, right? It depends on the metric you're measuring by. Is it accuracy? Is it speed? Is it cost? Like maybe a little bit of all three of those things. But we were able to kind of experiment very quickly because of some of the things that you're talking about. So I think that's a really important aspect. It's fundamentally changing the way that I think about how I'm going to solve a problem. I don't know. Let's go try it. Let's see what happens. Oh, to be fair, you and I kind of have the benefit of having access to all of the latest and greatest and it's not coming out of our pockets, right? Like, so there's some limits to that, and I totally recognize that. But I think that's going to change, and especially as local models become a thing, and cloud, and now you're doing this orchestration between the power of the cloud, the power of local. I think there's going to be a lot of cool things yet to be discovered and worked on. But experimentation
Yeah.
is
And I would say,
key.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. And like, I would say, with regards to cost, right? Like, yeah, there's some, real tangible costs to, invoking Opus 4.6, invoking, like Sonnet, like 4.6. But the reality is, honestly, it's very reasonable. So we do get some cost visibility into like what I would be paying if I were paying for this myself for a personal project versus, what I'm paying or what Amazon's paying for me to do this, on behalf of work that I'm doing at Amazon. And the cost is honestly very reasonable, right? And like one of our leadership principles too, that, we do very much try to embody every day is frugality. And so like part of our setup with, the knowledge architecture that we have is, I mean, we have agents that we've built. Agents, in this case, is a little bit of a generous term to say that we've built them. We've more like defined some agents in Kiro. Kiro has the ability to define custom agents, and you define prompts, but you also define what model they get to use, right? And so you can use the best model for the task at hand with, balancing speed, quality, and cost, like you said, right? And so I'll give you the example of like when we dive into logs, right? When we, as part of like our, ops agent, we have a logs, like analysis agent that has a preloaded skill that knows how to work with CloudWatch. CloudWatch logs insights. But more importantly, it's been configured to use Haiku 4.5. It is phenomenal at working through large amounts of text, finding that needle in the haystack that you're looking for. That's going to solve all your problems. And you do it in a cost-effective way. The cost per million token inputs on Haiku is dramatically cheaper than it is on Sonnet, and dramatically cheaper than it is on Opus. And the output is pretty much on par for all three because you're just doing some pretty simple data analysis. And so you pick the right tool for the job, right? Like, and these are the things that we, try to teach our customers as well, right? Is like, these are not necessarily cost prohibitive, tools at all. And in fact, they could actually help you save a lot of money by helping you get to market sooner with a better product. And it's just all about right now knowing what to use when. I think over time that will also become undifferentiated, right? The knowing what to use when will get undifferentiated. Kiro tries to do some of it, right? With like its ability to, auto select a model for you if you leave it in auto mode. And it actually does a pretty dang good job at that. But if you know what you're doing, you could take it a step further, right? And then it's kind of like driving a car, like auto or stick shift, right? Like it's some folks like stick shift and they get, better outcomes. But auto is there for the folks that need it, and it will cost optimize for you.
Yeah, there's that kind of brings up the question of like, when do you start optimizing? When do you start tuning? Because there's obviously different approaches and levels to which you can tune. And we've had, these are part of some of the conversations I'm having and the stuff that we're building as prototypes is sometimes it's a model change. Sometimes it's fine tuning. Sometimes it's using the right tool. And if you don't know the answer to that, what model should I use? Ask Claude, what model should I use for this thing? A quick example, we wanted to do sentiment analysis. Now, I don't need to throw Opus at a sentiment analysis. There are probably more efficient, frugal models that I could use just to evaluate some sentiment for like Haiku that do just as good of a job. But when does that part of that conversation, that tuning, because I get kind of live in prototype world. Hey, we just have to prove that it works. It's on you to productionize in it. But certainly a part of that putting path to production is, hey, let's balance the cost and the scale and well architect this. I mean, I think about this a lot. Like the well architected principles still apply even in the agentic world. It's got to be operationally efficient. It's got to be secure. It's got to be cost optimized. When do you start to think about some of that stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, day one, right? This is very much a day one concern, and it's mostly because it informs your scale. Like working with Gen AI today, working with AI today still means working with constraints and capacity in some places, right? Like there isn't an unlimited amount of resources to go around. We're also, having to come to the realization that any resources that we consume internally for our things is resources that we potentially could be taking away from a customer as well, right? It's like we do try to be very frugal about what we do, right? Like we try to work within the constraints that exist within our accounts, right? Like to not have to go through the process of having to raise quotas, raise limits, by finding ways to achieve the outcomes that we want with the least amount of cost. And so there is some optimization you have to do in order to get to that point, right? You do end up having to make decisions. Like for example, I'll give you one that we made for the like Demerzel project, and it's for our main agent, right? We quickly realized that the outcomes and quality that we wanted, we could only achieve with Sonnet or Opus, and so we settled on Sonnet. But a lot of the analysis that we needed to do on the data that would serve as the grounding for the response that we would get from our main agent didn't have to be processed by Sonnet. So how do we accomplish that? So, we lean in on a, sub-agent or agent delegation model, very similar to what Kiro is capable of doing as an agentic development tool. We did the same thing in our product. And so we have the main agent is Sonnet, and it invokes a sub-agent, which runs Haiku to do all of the essentially like data diving and knowledge retrieval to figure out what are the things that matter the most based on the constraints, and then return a synthesized, answer with citations back to the main agent to then go provide the final synthesis and reasoning for the customer. The net effect, right, is that you now have saved quite a bit of money. It adds a tiny bit of latency, not a whole lot, but you've saved money, right? Like, and you've saved resources and you've achieved the same quality output at the end. But it required kind of using the right tool for the right job and realizing that the problem is complex. There's parts of it you can do with one model, parts of it you can do with another. And the problem might get even more complex than that as we keep working on this, and we might end up employing a third model. Who knows?
Yeah, well, and this is like, I think about when you're talking about that, it requires some knowledge. Like you have to be aware of how these things work. You have to be aware of knowledge or capability or models or capabilities. And I'm just thinking, man, if I was just starting my career, if I was, and I didn't have the benefit of getting access to some of the tooling at the edge, tip of the spear type stuff at AWS, what would I be doing? Like, where would I be exploring and learning and getting hands on that stuff? Um, I think there's still a lot of opportunity. I mean, I think it's funny. Like, I have this mantra in my life that I adopted early as a developer. You've heard of the word, and I've been trying to find a way to sneak this in. I think this is a relatively good conversation to sneak it in. Yeah, you've heard of the term CRUD, right? Like create, read, update, delete. It's an obvious software development term. I kind of adopted that early in my career as a mantra for my life. It seemed to make sense to me that when I was feeling like crud, there were really four things I could do about it. I could be creative. Like that kind of keeps me from kind of becoming depressive. I create, and I've explored creative outlets in different parts of my life. Software is one of them, but building whatever. Uh, but the second one, read, like it always seems it makes sense to me that I needed to expand my knowledge, my thinking. I go read the docs, go learn, go start with trying to understand. And that's how I learn topics. Is I start by reading them. For example, if I'm gonna go do farming, I'm in my wife run a homestead. I buy the book and I like let me first read about it. It's like what am I getting myself into? And then I've started there's sensical update. If there's a perspective you're locked into, be humble and be willing to update that perspective, update your thinking, update your context and your knowledge, but your internal knowledge base. And then delete. Certainly, there are habits and behaviors that we all need to delete, and it's good to retrospect on those things and try to do that. But I would encourage like if you are that new developer and all of this stuff is like, oh my goodness, how am I supposed to learn all these models and learn all these approaches and these tools, and you're feeling kind of overwhelmed by that, just by apply the crud, go create something, go scratch an itch, go read the docs, be willing to learn and update your perspective, and delete what isn't working, observe and delete. I think that's an approach. That's my little soapbox pitch for new developers based on what you're talking about.
No, I mean, I think honestly, like, I think that's a better way than I could have put it. And that's exactly what I've been advising others, right? Like, it's how I learned what I know today, right? So, like, project-based learning, as I call it, is, I go look for a problem that I want to solve, even if it's one that is only for me, right? Even if it's something that will never see the light of day, no one will ever hear about what I did, like, that's fine, right? But I need something to solve, something that gives me a reason to build, because that's the only way that I will then have a series of challenges laid out in front of me to go conquer. And that's how I will know what needs to be learned to then be built. Because without that, right, like I can't really sit down and figure out, hey, how am I going to become a Kubernetes expert now? Like, oh, I'm going to go Google how to become a Kubernetes expert and go like read my way through becoming an expert. Like, granted, I'm sure there's some folks out there that can absolutely do that. Open a book, spend 30 minutes, and they probably retained a lot of knowledge. That's
Into
not
a
me.
matrix and it just is
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that is not me. If I don't have a purpose, if I don't have a project to ground the things that I'm learning and to give me direction as to what I need and to actually practice it, if I don't do that, it will not cement. It's just not something that I'll be able to carry with me and call experience to go take to my next venture. Like, I need a project, right? So like I work on a lot of hobbies at home, things that, like are fun for me. And there's like a second order effect there of like a lot of the things that I like to do as a hobby tend to benefit me at work as well. Right. So a lot of working with, like agents and AI and coding tools, right? I use a lot of Claude Code at home for a lot of my projects. Just things that I like to build, things that I help my wife building. And like I take that experience and I apply it at work as well. And so my advice, like junior engineers, right, is to like do the exact same thing, to go find a problem, go work on a project, go go solve it, right? Because like that's how you know the things that you don't know. Like that's one of the biggest problems with like learning, is that learning is not linear, right? Like learning is not, hey, I've learned A and I'm going to always learn B and then I'm going to learn C and there's no other way to do this. The reality is that we learn in fragments and we're all over the place. So we'll learn A and then we'll learn C and then F, and all the things in between we kind of just skipped over without realizing we did. And it's not like we have some ledger somewhere that tells me exactly what I haven't gone and learned. I just have a gaping hole in my knowledge that I don't even know I have. And it affects the way I think, it affects the decisions that I make, and it shows in my work. Right. So, like, how do you make sure that you've covered those gaps? Right. It's again, it goes back to like experience. You will discover you don't know that when you go build a project and you realize, why can't I make this work? And then you go, now we have access to like, agentic coding tools that are fantastic teachers on top of doers. They're also teachers. And you can learn a ton by just reading what it's doing and how it did it, asking it questions, interacting with it. And then you cover those gaps, those like letters and steps that you were missing. And then you take that experience forward, right? Like that'd be my advice to anyone, right? Is like, you're not going to learn watching YouTube videos alone. You're not going to learn reading alone. Those are huge parts of the learning process. But the create, like you said, in CRUD, or the doing part is huge. That's how you tie it all together.
Yeah, I love that. One of like the few little pure small joys left in my life is accidentally stumbling upon new knowledge that I didn't realize I needed to know. I love that. Like, I love to build things. I'm renovating my basement right now. And I just stumbled upon this YouTube video of a guy who showed me how to properly use a speed square. Now, I've always just done right angles and or a carpenter square. I've always just done angles and 45-degree angles. Like, that's all I really ever needed. I made it work. But then he showed me all like the 10 other things that it can do. And I'm like, oh, I've been doing this all wrong. This is amazing. Cool. So one, like, I think there's just a few things that I want to cover or ask you about. We talked about this software development lifecycle, learning all of these different techniques. But you said it doesn't stop just at the development. There's actually an operational side to this as well. Can you maybe share a little bit, like, operationally, some of the things that you're learning or doing or thinking about when it comes to this new way of working?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So different companies follow different methodologies for how they build and how they operate. At Amazon, the methodology we follow is that we hire software development engineers, and those software development engineers form engineering teams that not only build the products, they also operate the products. And so we have a very long history and culture of operations. We are very passionate about operational resilience and operating at scale. Like, AWS works with some crazy scales that you don't really see outside of like this industry, and honestly outside of this company. And like, that has some very meaningful effects as well in how you build things. Like, we share that experience with other engineering teams. We document those processes. But going back to like the operations piece, right? Like, there's a lot to operations, right? Like, operations is more than just, watching alarms and making sure that everything works. There's a entire culture around, like, for example, we have something at Amazon which we call the like operational resilience, like, review process, or the ORR process. And this is where we have consolidated many years of experience, multiply times many engineering teams, of what it takes to really operate a product at scale. What are the things to look for? What are the non-negotiable things that you should have in place in order to succeed? And then we go through all of our, architecture, through all of our software, and through our through our running code, and making sure that we actually meet those requirements, right? We try to shift a lot of that left, as we say, which is like, we move those principles into the engineering, into the design, so that whatever we're building, we're not going to re-architect because, we thought about scale, we thought about operations at the end. No, we think about operations at the start. But there's still things that you do even after the fact, right? There's things that you look for like proactive signals. You try to catch as many things as you can up front. You try not to have a culture of reactive operations, which is basically just looking at alarms, because by the time that one goes off and a customer is impacted, then you've already lost half the battle there, right? A customer was impacted, so you try not to impact a customer. If you do impact a customer, then there's a whole culture around, how do you go mitigate the impact to the customer. Like, that's always step number one is how do I quickly mitigate that impact so that I can delight that customer and try to, recapture as much, as much of the trust that I've been earning with them as I can. Then I worry myself and concern myself with root causing and going through, our internal process called the like COE process, where we, root cause and then figure out why it happened, the steps that led to it, and steps we could put in place to prevent such a thing from happening again. Right. But all of that is operations, right? Our engineers carry pagers. Our engineers are in on-call rotations. So we pass, the responsibility of the pager from one engineer to the next week after week. All engineers are in the rotation, regardless of their specialty, regardless of what they have comfort with or don't have comfort with. We all operate the product equally. We all own the product equally. That like on-call responsibility is a 24/7 responsibility. You can be paged at any point. And then we usually, especially depending on like how business critical the product is, at what phase or life cycle it is at, we'll have secondary on-call rotations. And so we'll have, ways for engineers to always escalate to the next engineer if they need additional assistance, depending on the severity of the issue. Could they handle it at 3 a.m, or do they need an extra set of hands? To help mitigate the issue for the customer. And so all of that is ingrained in our culture. We practice it every day. So the things that we build, we honestly, I feel very strongly that this is the right way and the best way to do it,
Yeah.
because our engineers are incentivized to build things that are easy to operate, right? To build things that they're not going to
Yeah.
be
You're
woken
gonna
up.
own it.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're going to own it. Like if you don't want to wake up at 3 a.m, then, let's think a little bit harder about how we can put certain defensive and hardening mechanisms in place to make sure we don't have to get up at 3 o'clock, right? It's not always perfect, but we put a lot of effort into it, right? Like we shift all of that left into design, into architecture to make sure that what we build is resilient, right? So we do very much follow the well architected, like process at Amazon, for scale, but also for cost, for security. Like we have organizations that help us on the security side as well with the auditing piece of it. But that's another responsibility we own, and we shift left, right? Like we have the responsibility to secure, like customer content and the things that we do. But yeah, ops is a really, really, really big part.
I know at the risk of being accused of being drinking too much Kool-Aid, Amazon Kool-Aid, and I've got, I'm obviously an Amazon and AWS fanboy. I really truly love the technology that we work on. Of course, work can still be work, and it can be challenging in some regards. But one of the things I really liked about Amazon were like the leadership principles. Again, this is going to sound really corporate. I get it. Like you don't have to tell me, but if you really think about them, they make a lot of sense. And ownership and bias for action, all of these things, like my wife, I can already feel her eyes rolling as I talk about this, because even when I first started working at AWS, I was like, those things just sort of clicked for me. I started bringing them up in everyday conversations. That ended relatively quickly because she was like, all right, no more LPs. Stop talking about LPs. But they make a lot of sense. And so like that, when I heard you talking about that, I just thought, man, this is the culture of the leadership principles being lived out within the team. And it's not always perfect. Sometimes it's ugly. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes those things get weaponized, and that's not great either. But I think if we all collectively still kind of um, adhere to those and think about them and align to them, the impact is obvious, right? Like there's a lot of really cool things that you're building and that we're building, and I'm excited about. Man, I've got so much more I want to talk about, but I don't want to like just like keep going and going around in circles. Like I'd love to. I kind of want to get just for some funsies. What's your are you Kiro CLI or IDE?
I'm curious CLI the whole way. Yeah, I'm a huge
Yeah.
fan of CLI agentic tools, but I do see a place for the IDE. The IDE is honestly pretty fantastic, and it's grown on me a little bit. It's one of the things that's like always held me back by IDEs is that many of the IDEs incarnations that I had seen before for agentic coding tools all were very single stream of consciousness tools. It's like one agent session, one thing at a time. Like, I think I was a little bit burned by the way like Klein works, takes over your IDE, opens the file, edits the file. Like, I can't even open files while this thing is working now. It's come a long way. Like there's some experimental features. It can work in the background now. It has like background shells. But honestly, the Kira IDE has taken a lot of those things that honestly were painful with all these other tools, and like they've honestly fixed them. Like you can run multiple agentic sessions, and it's pretty
I
smooth.
was just checking out the powers thing, which is like, I think is going to be a really impactful thing. I'm with you though. I'm a CLI first, although I'll be honest, I use both. I almost immediately, every time I go into any kind of vibe coding session, or whatever you want to call it, I am opening Kiro CLI, or first I am opening Kiro ID, and then I'm going into the CLI and I start my work in the CLI. And the ID just, it's just really nice for me to see the changes happening still. And I don't always get that feeling in the CLI. Like there's things happening and I know they're happening, and I could LS everything after, like have it tell me all the things it's doing. But seeing the actual structure, the folder structure, maybe it's just the way that my brain works, seeing those files being kind of organized and structured. And then, we live in a world of markdown files. So being able to preview those markdown
Yep.
files, it's like, otherwise, what's the point? I don't really necessarily translate like
Yeah.
markdown in my head.
No, no, absolutely. And I do something similar. I just do the same thing, but with VS Code. Just
Okay.
a big fan of VS Code. I've used it for a very long time. I think it's just one of those like, maybe it's like an old habit kind of thing, like that I could very easily replace with Kiro ID and be probably perfectly happy. But it's just I'm so used to it, and it's just not been a blocker for me because I'll use VS Code and then I'll usually open like multiple Kiro CLI sessions, mostly in VS Code as well. So just like a split view with terminals, and then I'll have all my terminals going and doing their own things. Sometimes I'll, SSH into my cloud development environments, tmux, and then work on multiple Kiro CLI sessions in there. Kind of depends on what I'm doing that day. But yeah, absolutely. Like being able to see those markdown files, like that's part of like the spec-driven process. Like when I'm writing a spec, I'll go, give it the instruction to write a spec. At some point in that session, it's going to write the file that very first time the file shows up, in the file hierarchy, and then I can go open it, and then I can open Markdown Preview to the right. We have like Mermaid rendering like plugin installed as well, so I can see all the Mermaid charts, the sequence diagrams, all the good stuff. And before the models even had a chance to like go, or the agent has had a chance to go review and do those like iterative like review rounds or experimentation stuff like that, I'm already reading the spec, right? Like I'm already like taking a peek through it, trying to see like what are the assumptions that it's made, what are the functional requirements it captured, like what is the approach that it's recommending to take. And I almost always encourage, that sequence diagram at the very beginning. I strongly believe that a sequence diagram is one of like the most powerful, tools to convey any software architecture, because if especially when you work in a world of like distributed components, like a sequence diagram is the only way that you can really convey succinctly exactly what you're doing and how you're going to do it and what are all those failure paths. And so I very much enjoy reading those because I get pretty much 90% of the picture by just reading that sequence diagram.
Yep.
And then I'll
Everything
usually
else
start
is
taking notes.
detail. Yeah.
Like I will take notes by reading that. And then by the time that the agent is done, I have a couple notes of things that I wanted to work on, or if it's just really wrong, I will interrupt it. Like I will interrupt the agent, and then I'll, kind of steer it and say, hey, it's good you went down this path, but that's not the path I wanted. I want this. And then, just kind of summarize what you want. And it's really good at like, oh yeah, I have all of that in my context window. I know exactly what you're talking about. Let me go edit it. And then, I can kind of course correct it. Which is great, right? And so like I do that by opening in VS Code and looking at it.
Any secret weapon plugins, tools, frameworks? I've got mine, and that's going to be, it's going to, I'll just mention my skills. I'm going deep down skills, and not just like skills as a mechanism, but like how to write really good skills that don't hang the CLI, that operate the way that I need them to, have the right reference material, have all the right depth of detail. Skills is where my head's at. What about you? What's your secret weapon? What are you hooked on
Yeah.
right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, skills is a pretty big one. For me, it's the entire package, right? It's really your knowledge architecture setup, that AI steering package, right? So like one pattern that we've all consolidated on across all of our engineering teams is like all of our workspaces all have a package we call the AI steering package. This AI steering package contains all of our documents. So that's where you're going to find our specs, our research docs, our high level design documents, and our vision document. You will also find some other long lived documents in there, our threat models, for example, our like DNS configuration. A lot of other stuff will be in there as well. But we also have in this package all of the custom agents for Kira that we use, their prompting, their context. And then we have a large repository of skills, right? And so the skills are very much oriented to the frameworks that we're using, like our overarching tech stack. And so some of the skills we have used by borrowing it from, others in the organization that have already done a really good job at building some very strong skills that don't need much in the way of like, review or iterations to make them useful. Like they're already useful in their state. And then others we develop from the ground up, and we use an agent to build skills, and we do it by essentially grounding it in internet research, right? So like we have access to like internal tools that can perform like internet deep research to do like grounding that way. Kiro itself has the ability to web search and web fetch. So like a combination of those with the right prompting and then a lot of iteration, you can make it iterate on writing those skills. Like you want to, write a skill about some particular like web framework that you're using or some design system that you're using. Like as long as the documentation is public, you can absolutely do it. If the documentation is not public, it's a first party product internally at Amazon. Then we have our own internal tools to do the same thing. Like we have our own ability to like do some deep research with our own internal knowledge, pump out some skills, goes into our, big AI steering package. And it's all of that plus the MCPs that we give our agents that is just, like the only way to be effective, in my opinion, right? We strive for, using no more than around 15 to 16,000 tokens for our context. So, when we start our Kira CLI session with a parameter that, has a 200,000 like token context, like we try to sit at 15,000 tokens, sometimes 20,000 tokens. And yeah, we work with that. And that usually
Or would you
includes
say
like
like less than like 10% of the context?
about 10%, I think is pretty reasonable. And honestly, all the way up to 15, you're probably still in a very healthy place. Anything more than that, I think you probably have a lot more in the context than you probably need. Right. And it's like, and that's not just a problem of, because, you know, a lot of people say less is more. And sometimes it's, not really true. In this case, honestly, most times it actually is true, because it depends on what you're working on. But that's where the Kiro custom agents come in, right? It's like when you have very specific tasks that you're doing, like you're diving logs, like that's where you need to make sure you always load your CloudWatch skill. Like you're not leaving that up to fate and chance that the agent will decide to read that skill for you. And so like for a lot of these other agents, you strip it of things that it doesn't need access to, things that it doesn't need in context. And the agent just performs better. The quality of the work is honestly better the less noise you have in there. So it's just a matter of figuring that out, right? So like kind of goes back to like context engineering. It's not really about how good of a prompt you write and how convincing you are at doing the work well. It's about making sure you have the right context to begin with.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And you're the human orchestrator, making sure it all is greased and operating as it should, at least until it's fully autonomous. And like you said, we're sipping mai tais on a beach somewhere. Hey
Yeah,
Juan, what
someday.
someday maybe. Juan, what is there anything you wanted to talk about that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet?
That's a great question. I mean, I think we had covered a lot of the subjects here that like I had in mind. Let me think through here.
Yeah, I know you had some notes. You came in. You want to talk about some stuff. I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day, man. We could go deep into like, and I would love to someday. Maybe if we get another chance to have a follow up, like crack open what that steering package really looks like. Maybe do like a live coding. So like, hey, here's how here's how I know when my context is starting to be overloaded, and maybe it's time to branch off and make a sub agent, or here's how we share agents across the team so that if I develop something cool as a sub agent, I can share it with my teammate. There's so many different like little nooks and cranny of this whole process that we could explore. That honestly we could talk about it all
yeah,
week.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd love to dive in like into these and kind of, take a peek behind the curtain on some of the stuff that we've done and yeah, I mean, like, share some of the architecture that we employ for building these AI steering packages. Like I think it's a very effective pattern. I think it's a pattern that applies to a lot of things. It's a pattern that I use in my own personal projects. Again, there's a second order effect here. Like a lot of this I figured out as well working on my personal projects. And then I brought these ideas, back to the table. All of my coworkers that do similar things brought their ideas, like awareness from papers they read. We consolidate our thoughts and we try new things, right? In fact, one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet that we've been experimenting with a lot lately, and I use it a ton and have been since about November of last year, is voice dictation. Voice dictation is extremely effective for me. I am not a fast typer. It's like when I dictate, I can hit 180 to 220 words a minute. I can't do that like when I type. And I like to do a lot of stream of consciousness style, conversational style prompting with agents, right? Like, so things that I will do very often is like, sometimes I'll go to a phone booth with, my phone and my AirPods, and I'll just open the like voice memos app and I'll speak for 15 minutes, 20 minutes about some idea that I have, how I think we can like, combine these two things or that one thing and then do this one thing. And like, it's like all that is just a stream of consciousness dump, right? Straight into a voice memo. And then I'll take
Tried it.
that.
It's a skill. Like it was awkward for me at first to just
Yeah.
talk into the ether and like kind of think out loud. It is a skill. I've tried it. I've not quite totally shifted. I still type, but I might try it again. I'm always afraid of the stigma that comes with voice.
Yeah,
Voice.
I mean, it was a little bit awkward at first, and I think it still is. Hence the I went to a phone booth part of my story here, just kind of hiding off in a corner. Looks like I'm
Sure,
talking
sure.
to someone, but I'm really talking, to a computer. But yeah, I mean, it's very effective, right? Like stream of consciousness to organize your thoughts. It's phenomenal. I mean, like you need to write a docket work. It doesn't have to even be technical. Like it doesn't need to be about some code you're going to write eventually. It can very much be, some document or a proposal for a business process or whatever it is. Like it is surprisingly effective. Like I keep, for example, like my own repository on my like machine, and then I have my own, like code repo that's like locked in private to me with my notes. And I keep an entire like markdown structure where I break down all my projects and all the things that I'm working on, and like that is my essentially, kind of like my silo of thoughts. It's my mental palace, right? Like I have
Yeah.
I have all my notes, my ideas, my narrations, my documents, my breakdowns, everything is in there. And so that's where I, will eventually copy my narrations into. And then I've got some Kiro steering in there. And then I'll Kiro steer my way into like writing a PRFAQ, for example, right? Or writing a user guide for something like like, especially when I don't need the context of the project. I just need like some thoughts, on paper, and then I need to think about it with an agent. Like I absolutely do it that way, right? So that works very well for me. It's very effective to go do it off on the side, but it's also very effective to do it right in your CLI or right in your IDE, right? So like if you're using a Mac, I am, and so like you can enable like voice dictation with a shortcut on your keyboard, and then as you dictate, it basically does the whole like automatic speech recognition locally on your machine, and it begins to type for you. It's not going to get it perfect, honestly. It makes a lot of like silly typos and misunderstands some of the words you're saying, especially when they're like technical words. But you'd be surprised how good Opus is at still understanding exactly what you said. Like it will have like 5% of the words will just not be exactly what you meant to say, but Opus understood 100% of what you meant. And it's great, like especially when you're like debugging things, just turn on voice dictation and just ask the agents like, hey, your task is to investigate ABC123 in my sandbox environment. I was using the agent. It seems to have errored out or timed out. Can you dive the agent logs, look at the database, like let's try to figure out what's going on there. Whatever. Enter. Just send it. Open another tab. Just go do something else. But that agent's off in the background already working, right? and then I've got like audio alerts in my VS Code. So like anytime any of my terminals, like are done, then it does a little chime, a little ding. So whenever I hear that, I know, oh, one of my tabs, one of my terminals is trying to get my attention. Like it either is prompting me for something or it's done with a task that I gave it. Right. And so like that's how I remember to go back to it. But sometimes I completely forget until the next day and I'm like, oh yeah, I was working on that. And then I go see the output of it. But yeah.
Yeah, we need to bring back some retro interruptions. Like Clippy needs to make a resurface. I think what is that? If you, Jurassic Park, you remember the little guy that does the explainer videos for like
Yep. I
Dino DNA?
remember.
We got to bring that guy back. Like that's how you need to be notified of your agent work completing. I what you're saying, I resonate with. I'm doing myself maybe not as regimented or as structured and disciplined as you might be doing it, but I find myself like kind of being moved and inspired, and it kind of hits me at different moments. It's not always the same way. I wish I was like that, like where every day I'm going to work on this and this, and I was like this really tight regimen. But oftentimes I'll be like, I'll wake up early morning, and I'll be like, I just kind of wake up with this idea. I'm like, what if we did it like this? And okay, and then I'm like really inspired, and I'll come up here and I'll quick hash out something. I call it a solution brief, like just sort of this sort of structured document of my thinking. Here's the premise. Here's why the other things don't work. Here's the gap it's filling. Here's the kind of a next step directional approach. And I've done that since I've started working here. And almost I would say 80% of them go nowhere. Never read by anybody. They're just a harebrained idea that I had and I just stashed away. But more and more increasingly, as I have conversations with folks like you or have conversations with other team leaders, they're like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did that, something like this? And I'm like, you know what? Actually, I have a paper about this topic. I thought through some of this a little bit. Let me pull that up and pick
Yeah.
up where I left off. And that's kind of been my approach, just sort of as inspiration strikes me, I document it in something called a solution brief using some of these agentic approaches that you're talking about. I'm curious though. I like what you're talking about. Maybe there's an opportunity. This is part of that you and update in the crud. Learning from you and thinking, okay, how could I be a little bit more regimented, structured about this, and what kind of value could I get out of it? So it's good. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, experimentation, right? Like, you're trying one approach, maybe try it another, see if it works. But honestly, if more people did exactly what you're doing, they would quickly realize that that is the value that we bring to the table in a world of AI. Like, exactly the thought you had, exactly how you leveraged AI is the value that you bring, right? Like, it's that experience, it's that intuition, like it's those things that are like hard to really completely replace with AI, at least, for the foreseeable future, and allows us to just be more productive with AI. That's like one solution brief that you didn't have to spend like 3 hours one morning typing out by hand on a keyboard, right? Like, it's like I will take my phone out when I'm walking from, the 5 minute walk from my car to my office. When I get to work in the morning, sometimes I'll just take my phone, put an AirPod in, and then I just had an idea in the car, but I'm driving, so like I try not to be distracted there. But when I get, to the parking deck, I've had time to think about it, and I just go stream of consciousness straight into my, you know, like voice memos app. Then I get to my desk, and then copy transcript, paste, and then I'm already working with that, right? Like that could literally be the very first prompt of the day that I just sent an agent to go work on some high level design document, right? And I get a little bit of a head start, right? And it's just, to me, this is like, I'm passionate about this. This isn't like Amazon expecting me to work outside of work, right? Like I'm excited about this stuff. Like, and I like working in this way with these tools, right? Like it feels very natural to me. And so, yeah, these are the things that, we're slowly experimenting with, right? So dictation, it's huge.
Yeah.
I think a lot more of us will start doing it more often soon.
I think so. I think you're absolutely right. Juan, I like your perspective. I like your optimism. I know sometimes it can be easy to kind of go to the dark corners of this new brave new world that we're pioneering. And and I'm like you. I probably trend towards more of the optimistic side. It's exciting. It's fun to build things, and I don't do well with like forced inspiration. Like go be creative and be and motivated to. And I'm like, okay, man, I got to go take a nap first. Like give me a second to like reboot the system, and then I'll wake up with something inspiring. But these tools, like you said, it's felt very natural to me, and I've really loved learning it, and I get really excited talking to people like you and learning from people like you and trying new things. So, hey, man, I appreciate you coming on and talking to me. I think this is a good conversation, and I can't wait to get it out.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. And then if you want to go a little bit deeper and like peek behind the curtain, like I'm sure we can put something together that we can like share and you know get into that AI steering package. Maybe get a little bit into like a day in the live off and do some like live vibe coding too. Maybe we'll see.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching, and a very special thanks to our guests for joining. Hey, if you want to stay in the know on what specialists at AWS are doing, make sure you grab a Builder ID if you haven't already, and join our space on Builder Center, where we'll be posting almost all of our content exclusively. We'll also have show announcements on X, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and we'd love to hear what you think and what you're working on. Until then, I'm Farmer Todd, and I'll see you out in the field.